Bartenders of Reddit, what are some craziest thing drunk people have told you while completely hammered? Had a regular get drunk and recount a dream he had once about Freddy Krueger. Several years later, I'm having a conversation with someone about dreams in that same bar. He just happened to be sitting next to the customer I was chatting with, fairly drunk, and idly listening to our conversation, so I decided to try it. This one time, I had a dream that I was being chased down the street by Freddy Krueger. Then while he was chasing me, he grew really big and would cup his hands over the sun. He would do it really fast, and there was this crazy strobe effect. This was nearly exactly how he had originally told it to me. About halfway into the story, I noticed him look up. By the end of it, he was standing, tears in his eyes, scared to death that we had the same Freddy dream, yelling, "No damn way, dude! No damn way! Are you serious? Are you damn with me right now?" "Yeah, dude, I'm damn with you. You told me that story a few years ago and forgot." I had him going, though. The story pretty much ends there. We had a good laugh. He let the relief wash over him. We went outside and smoked. I think he might have said, "Good one," at some point. I might have told him there's no such thing as Freddy at some point. Story 2. My favorite was a regular who came up to the bar for a glass of red wine. At this point, he was not yet a regular. It was his first time here. I poured the elderly man a nice glass of Pinot Noir, told him a little about the wine and the history of the building the bar is in, built in 1604, because he seemed interested in it. He was. We chat a little, and he is overall a pleasant but quirky old man. At one point, he looks at me and says, "You must know, I have a gift. I can read people's past, not their current past, but previous lives. I can't do it with everyone, but I am getting strong signals from your past. Would you like to know yours?" We're now joined by another regular of mine, a girl I was actually trying to get with at the time, but this sadly never happened. I pour the man another glass, pour myself one too, because this is about to get good. He tells me what he sees and feels in my past lives. There is one live he can see very clearly, but it's a bit shocking, he says. I tell him to go on. The girl is asking all kind off in-your-face questions. She's being a little annoying, honestly. The old man ignores them or answers them if she can and tells me about this previous life I lived. He tells me I was an Irish boy, I have a big red beard, go figure, and that my family and I felled Ireland during the famine. We got on a boat to New York. My mom died on the boat, and I joined a gang in New York. I eventually die in a gang fight with a rival gang. Sounds familiar, right? Well, when the man went to the bathroom, I checked, and indeed, Gangs of New York was on cable the night before. The man comes back, and the girl and I play along. He tells me some more details about the movie. I mean, my previous life. I go along with his bullcrap until he stops talking about it. Then the girl turns to him and asks, "And me, can you see my previous life?" He looks at her, takes a sip of his wine, and says, Yes, you were a monkey." Story 3. My least favorite thing was helping escorts get so drunk that they didn't care who their johns were, nor how ugly or skeezy or whatever awful crap they had to endure. It made me sad, but I knew that they probably had kids to feed or some other story that, in their minds, legitimized their occupations and their other life choices. Too many people tell you their sad stories when they're drunk. I had a guy come in and tell me he was being subpoenaed to testify against one of his lifelong friends, who was a crooked politician. One of my regulars was a restaurant manager who was saving up for a sex change operation. He tipped extremely well, and when you're working behind a bar counter, you overhear every stupid get-rich-quick scheme, every terrible pickup line. Everyone is convinced they have the world figured out. Not much is worth less than bar wisdom, but if you sit in one spot long enough, you'll eventually convince yourself you've been everywhere. Story 4. I'm a bartender, waiter at a restaurant in Puerto Rico. After Hurricane Irma, the owner bought a huge ass power generator, so we wouldn't go out of business. We were fine for a few days before we got our asses kicked by Hurricane Maria. I was able to get back to work 5 days after the Maria hit and crap. I have never had such an emotional day at work. I worked for 12 hours straight, selling bottled water and sodas due to the dry law. After about maybe the 8th straight hour working, the place started to empty due to the curfew. There were military enforcing people to go home before nightfall. I was cleaning up the place when an older gentleman, Vietnam vet, and coincidentally a die-hard Steelers fan, just like me, came over for a whiskey sour. At first, I told him I couldn't sell it to him because of the dry law and I could get in really big damn trouble. Turns out he's friends with all the military surrounding the area and he had permission for one drink. I served him the drink and he just straight up asked me, "How are you, man? How's your family?" That destroyed me. I hadn't seen my parents in days, had no cell signal so I couldn't call them. I had just moved in with my girlfriend and after the storm, she had to stay with her mom because she lived closer to her job. I was incredibly alone and felt hopeless. I just started crying and talking to the guy and eventually calmed down, but crap, I needed a good cry. Story 5, somewhat related. I used to work in a bar across from a large hospital. I had one guy spend a lot of time in the bar while his wife was in the hospital across the street having a difficult childbirth. He told me my martinis were the best and promised to name his child after me, I, of course, dismissed this as the drunken ramblings of a madman, came in a couple weeks later, and showed me the birth certificate of his daughter. She had 4 middle names, one of which was a feminized version of mine. To this day, I'm kicking myself for not asking who the other 3 were named after. I wonder if any of them were other bartenders. Story 6. Been a bartender for years. Have older ladies trying to pick me up pretty regularly. Have had dealers slide me $50 bills. Have had people try to fight me because I cut them off or it was last call. The craziest things is the people I see cheating or the people that I learn are swingers. I live in a pretty small town, so it's weird to see. I've had some bad experiences, but I've also had some great ones. I took social work in college as a stepping stone to get into policing, but had kind of given up after not being able to find a job in social work. I was serving some guy at the bar top, and suddenly he calls me over and out of nowhere, says, "You're into policing, eh?" I was pretty confused because I hadn't mentioned it at all, and I've never seen this guy. I asked him how he knew. He replied, "I've been a cop for 30 years. We know a cop when we see one." And this motivated me. I explained my situation and how I couldn't find a job, and he gave me a bunch of tips and pointers on how to get into policing, and I was just really appreciative. He was sitting there quiet all night, not saying anything, till suddenly he burst into conversation like that. I was pretty confused, but he was a great guy. Story 7. I have had so many bizarre people walk into the bar I work at. It's a really small place that people enjoy drinking quietly at. Over the years, I've had a range of odd topics, from a restaurant owner admitting he never sold fresh food to people unless they knew him, to a person admitting stalking and eventually assaulting a woman, which made him move to a new city. Lots of people end up talking about how they have no one to talk to about their problems. So I guess they find comfort telling a stranger who doesn't have an obligation to care. Story 8. I used to be a barman at a private function venue. Often had people who did okay, but considered themselves as rich and incredibly wealthy. These middle-aged older men would brag to a 19-year-old about how much more money they earned than me, and that I obviously made some mistakes to get there. Being the idiot that I am, I'd usually converse and listen, ask questions about how they got to be so successful, and quite often they'd give me a good luck in the future tip. Worth it. It also taught me a lot about discussing what you earn. Story 9. Man, so many to choose from here. I'll give a few of my favorites. The time this woman was talking to me and started to complain about her boyfriend's penis. He was sitting next to her. She didn't notice. The time some drunk guy gave me an identity card that was obviously fake. I denied him, and he said, "No, it's fake, it's fine." But my favorite happened when I was actually a cocktail waiter when I was 19 years old. This smashed country woman grabbed my shirt and pulled me into to try and whisper, but was basically yelling while pointing at the guy next to her at the bar. She said, "I'm going to having sex with this guy." He looked confused and replied, "I don't know you." What made it so funny was the guy's girlfriend was on the other side of him, staring daggers at this woman. When I was a cocktail, I actually got knocked out by a drunk guy who tried to punch another guy but was so drunk he missed wide right and made contact with me. When I came to, he was on the ground by the bouncer and apologizing to me. I felt bad for that guy. Story 10. The 5'3" waitress, a man who weighs at least 250 pounds and is 6'2", told me he'd punch me in the face if I didn't get him a to-go cup for his Long Island iced tea he asked for after I told him it was illegal. So, there's that. Story 11. There was this guy at the bar a few weeks ago. He was lonely, and his face was completely hazy. He stayed until closure time without saying a single word beside what drink he wanted. Usually I don't, but this time I had a lot of pity for the man, so I offered him the last round. He was the only client left. When it was time for me to go home, he asked really politely if I could knock him down, and that he will give me €50. I started laughing, but quick after I realized he was serious, so I tried to ask what's up, and why do he want me to do this? Told him that no money will make me hit an innocent man. He didn't answer, but he thanks me, then moved on. I called the police to describe the guy and let them know my fear that he does something stupid to himself. No news from him or police since. So I'm sure everything went well that night, thankfully. Story 12? I have 2 favorite stories. The first one is one time, while I was working, my husband stopped by to visit me, and he was flirting big time. The guy next to him, who was plastered, leaned over and attempted to whisper, but ended up shouting, "She definitely wants to go home with you, but I don't know if you noticed she is wearing a wedding ring. Tread lightly." My husband started laughing and said, "Well, she is my wife, so I hope she wants to come home with me." My second favorite story was when this girl came in with this guy. The whole time, he was this sleazy a-hole to her, constantly putting her down and touching her inappropriately, even though she constantly told him to stop. Later, he went to the restroom, and she admitted this was their first date, and she didn't know what to do. She was really scared. Then, she went to the bathroom just to get away for a while. When the guy came back, he poured something into her drink, thinking no one saw. Right as she was coming back, I picked up her drink and dumped it on his head and told the bouncer what happened. I have never seen the bouncer happier than when he literally picked this guy up and threw him out. The girl and I are now best friends. Story 13. I once had a military guy. probably about 26, who was a regular at the bar I worked at last year. He would come in alone to chat with my coworker and I, and seemed pretty lonely. This bar was in a smaller town with not a great scene or much military presence. Anyway, one slow night, he comes in right before I'm about to close and asks me for a whiskey sour. I make it for him, but before I can even give it to him, he looks up at me with the saddest face and says, "I have something to confess. I take steroids." I was pretty speechless, so I said, at least it isn't substances. And on the next breath, he goes, "I've never told anyone that," and slumps down in his chair. I have no idea if he had a bad sexual encounter or if the weight of his use was just too much to keep private anymore. But I honestly felt bad for the guy. Wonder where he ended up. Story 14. And my favorite, most ducked up one from a girl in her late 20s, early 30s. We had a function hall upstairs, huge room with its own separate bar. The toilets were on the ground floor, one level down. This cute, very drunk girl came to the bar and said that the room was a bit smelly and that we should check the toilets downstairs. The loos didn't smell, but there was a strong miasma of crap in the air. So I had the joyous task of investigating. Turns out a guest, who we think must have done a lot of substances, had struggled to find the toilet, despite the signs, and had tried to use the small lift instead, but had run out of time and just crap herself. So she had taken off her tights, wrapped up her crap, and put them in someone else's handbag. Never found out who did it, so we could only assume she had left straight after that, by taking the stairs, past the loos, early. Story 15. My friend was a bartender a while ago. She told us that one time a man said to her, "If I weren't gay, I would be motorboating those huckalofas you have there," and left. Yes, huckalofas. Story 16. Was a paid designated driver, and I have a crap ton of stories. I used to drive to people to the big city and take them to strip clubs and such way before Uber. One trip, this guy is flashing a fistful of $100 bills. We are at the strip club, and he's flashing hundreds to the waitresses and tipping the strippers singles. I'm the designated driver, so basically I get free soda and, in a few places, wings and such. At the end of the night, the guys is supposed to pay me $10 since it's $10 a head and there's 12 people in the van. He's like, "Well, I'm out of singles. Here's one of the $100 bills." The next morning, he shows up, asks me if he gave me one of the hundreds. Apparently, he takes $1,000 in hundreds as a look at me, I'm damn loaded. I look at him and I say, "You told me not to say anything about last night." He looks at me and asks why. I say you were very drunk and tipped one of the strippers. Won the hundreds trying to get her to give you special favors, but you all of a sudden lost interest after she was off stage and came round to you at the table. He asked me if she had red hair and such, and I said, "Yeah, I think so." He got sheepish and admitted she was a stripper he had cheated on his wife with and knocked up, and some stuff. Then he laughed and said, "I guess she got a child support payment after all." The guy was a total skis. Another time I took a bachelorette party to a male strip club, and that was pretty damn insane. They were literally hooting and hollering the whole time like a bunch of lunatics. One of them actually got so drunk she came out of the bathroom stark naked and tried to run up the stage. It was messed up, but they paid me double the $10 a head fee, so I endured. Story 17. An American tourist once told me I was the best person ever and promised, unprompted, to name his first son after me. Drunk American tourists are honestly some of the best, most entertaining customers. Story 18. All of the things that they would tell anyone else, if they had anyone else. Got a lot of mentally ill and downtrodden folk sitting in front of me just to have a chat. Took me a while to realize that I'm the only person a lot of them ever talk to in a week. Story 19. I had one guy who claimed to have studied sociology. Psychology while in the army started telling me about how much he knew how much about soldiers' brains, and made it clear he was actively analyzing me and testing the reactions of my coworkers. It was very uncomfortable, as I'm already aware of how screwed up I am and complexes I have, but hoped it wasn't that obvious. He did tip me though, so he's definitely far from the worst customer I've ever had. Story 20. People think it might be funny or entertaining to be behind a bar chatting with guests. To some extent, it is. That said, it's not the late nights that get to you. Not the college student who throws up all over your establishment. Not the drunk a hole who won't leave the female bartenders alone. It's when you first open the doors and see the old man with shaking hands waiting to come inside. It's the widow who comes in each night looking for company because she lost the love of her life and can't bear to spend another night alone with her thoughts. It's the father who breaks his back, working some crap labor job all day in the sun so he can feed his kids, and putting down half a bottle of whiskey each night is the only thing keeping him from dead. I don't drink anymore. I won't. Alcohol is the perfect answer to your problems until it's not. Story 21. Regular, quiet fellow. Usually stayed for 1 or 2 pints and then headed out. It was several weeks before he opened up. He wasn't hammered when he told me. It was really just conversation. Buddy had killed a guy while driving under the influence. He started coming to my bar after he finished his prison sentence. He seemed pretty damn choked up about it. I always wonder how he's doing. I got out of the business though, lost touch with the regulars. Story 22. One guy told me his girlfriend wanted them to get married. He was asking me if I thought it was a good idea, even though this was the first time I'd ever met him. I told him if he's asking a stranger if they think it's a good idea for him to get married, then it's probably not a good idea. Story 23. Hammered woman comes out of the bathroom with a painful look on her face and fidgeting with her skirt. She looks me dead in the eye and says, "Never use motor oil as lube," and then stumbles out of the bar. Story 24. When I was a bartender, I learned very quickly that people, good and bad, have their moments. I had some regulars who would come in and drink. Nice couple, always seemed to be getting along. One night, the husband comes back to the bar while I'm closing up. We did some casual chatting when he looked at me, deadpan, and said he will get us the hotel right down the street. I politely declined and called him a cab. It shook me up. I never told his wife. Another time, a regular got really messed up and invited me to have a sex with him and his wife. Apparently, judging by the look on his wife's face, she had no idea that her hubs wanted a three-way. Never saw them again. Another time, I ordered a regular some oysters from a nearby restaurant. He offered me some when they arrived, and I declined. I said I don't like the texture. He said it's just like swallowing, and asked if I would be the mouth to his oyster that night after my shift. And this is what it's like being a woman bartender. Men get thirsty in more than one way, and they are shameless about it. Story 25. If I just mention Weatherspoons, any United Kingdom person will perk up and go, "Oh, here we go." Standard Saturday night, full of the regulars. Our setup was booths along the wall and freestanding waist-high tables set up in the middle of the floor. Young, skanky-looking couple came in early and just started smashing back the drinks. He passively keeps staring into the distance versus getting the next round. She keeps checking out all the guys. About 2/3 of the way through the night, she starts getting verbally abusive towards him, and a couple lads let us know that she has been asking around for someone to beat him up. Okay, we could make a scene, but we are about an hour off closing and expect them to piss off and sleep it off. Never seen them before, hadn't seen them since. Standard, drink up, time to go, we are closing. While we do our close down, everyone leaves, except, what the heck, they are still there. Some of the staff are getting pretty pissed, and the manager is there trying to get them to leave. She doesn't want to, nursing her last Alco Pop. We have pretty much closed down by this point. Doors ready to lock, and she's starting to go over the edge. Her boyfriend? Still staring off intro the distance. Couple verbals pass between us all. I'm passively standing there just to back up the manager. Now he was a lot bigger than me, so the light switch in her mind decides I am the one she needs to throw a punch at. She is smaller than me, so she hops up, bops me a hook right into my nose. Ow, what the heck, stinging like crazy. She saunters out, everyone laughs. Never did heal 100%, and one nostril is slightly bigger than the other. Misalignment, I have kicked people out for giving BJ in the bathroom. Story 26. After their shift, I talked to one of the dishwashers who seemed like a weird but nice enough to talk to guy. We talked about music, he was sad about Lemmy's death, and I was like, he did what he wanted to do his whole life and died by 70 years old. For me, there was nothing to be sad about. I admire the man. Then he went like, yeah, you're right. I think he's in a better place now. Doesn't have to see all this bullcrap. I nodded, and he continued, with the new world order controlling our thoughts. That made me realize that there were a few glasses left to clean and not to talk to him anymore. Story 27. The one I won't ever forget is after working at a huge Oktoberfest party, I was driving 2 other girls home, and we decided to stop at 711 really quick. The girl sitting in the back was the only one who went in, and as we are sitting there waiting for her, this dude comes out of nowhere and gets in the back seat of my car. I turned around to see this annoyingly loud drunk dude who wouldn't shut up earlier in the night or leave when closing up, sitting right behind me, and he starts telling me and my friend how he was waiting for us, so we can all go to his homie's house and get some met, and then duck us both again. Never saw this dude before this night. I asked the dude to get out of my car, and he says no, and then goes on about all his plans for us that night for 15 minutes, in great detail, until the cops got there. And then once they were there, he starts crying and screaming about how his girlfriend broke up with him, and he had nowhere to go, and that we needed to understand that he just really wanted to have fun, and how he chose us to have fun with. He also locked himself in the back seat of my car and would roll down the window to yell remarks at the police until he ended up getting pepper sprayed and dragged out of my car by the cops because he wouldn't get out on his own. We had to get a new ride home after that because of the pepper spray in my car. Story 28. As a bartender at a pub, hotel in a fairly well-off rural village next to a big semi-royal estate in the United Kingdom. Tones of posh old men wearing tweed moaning about the immigrants whilst drinking their 50 pounds whiskey. Get a tone of middle-aged women wanting to feel my hair and plenty of people wanting to fight me. The usual. We often did weddings at weekends, which kept you on your toes. Given the location and price, it tended to be pretty posh families, so they were often mundane. We've had a few bad ones over the years, though. My favorite was a group of chavs from a few towns over. Long story short, the best man got in a fight with the bride's dad. Huge punch-up. Best man falls out with his wife and says he's going to walk home at about 10 p.m., which we think nothing of. At about 3:30, when we're all cleaned up and we've all had a couple of drinks, I go upstairs to grab the keys from the office to lock up, and the guy's lying on the sofa asking for a spare key to his room so he can go see his wife. Me, not wanting to get myself in crap, told him we don't have a spare, so he'll have to sleep there and not move all night so he doesn't set off the alarm. He was there for breakfast the next morning and said nothing about it, not sure how much he remembered. And once the most over-the-top eccentric gay man that came in around Christmas with a local. He told a man who was eating a meal with his wife that he'd like to have his way with him, bought the most expensive bottle of champagne we sold, a ton of money, that he didn't open and came in the next day trying to refund. And then as we managed to get him to leave, he said he lost his sunglasses and kicked off saying I'd stolen them, made a huge scene and stormed off calling us thieves. His friend came in 5 minutes later to apologies because they were in his car the whole time. The weirdest, though, is this elderly couple that would come up in once a month. Seemed to be very well off and very well spoken. They would always sit outside, regardless of the time or weather, and they would always only ever have one drink. I started noticing there was a younger guy with them sometimes, which I assumed was their son. Something not quite right with him. He was very soft-spoken, but said some very strange things and just gave off a really weird kind of strange vibe. Anyway, turns out it's not their son, but their toy boy. They'd come to the pub to pick him up and take him home. Weird. Story 29. I was sitting at the bar in a casino with my sister, having a few drinks too many. The bartender and I were talking about me being blind without my glasses and him being mostly deaf. I told him we'd be perfect for each other. Then he goes on to tell me that he actually has glasses that make him look like a nerd and he sports them with suspenders. I literally shouted, "I do you!" My sister had been watching a basketball game, heard me, and got red in the face from laughter. The bartender is thanking me enthusiastically while blushing. I had no intentions of saying that out loud. That was supposed to be in my head, guys. Drunk me is a very open and honest person. Story 30. Obligatory, not a bartender, but standing at the door with security. And this guy stumbles up at like 8 p.m. Instead of an ID, he hands the bouncer his credit card. So as the bouncer says he needs his certificate, he turns his phone flashlight on and hands him a different credit card. Then while trying to turn off the flashlight, starts playing music. Then started happy crying when we told him to go get some water and come back later, and gave us all hugs. He stumbled down to the next bar, flashlight on, music playing, and credit cards in hand. Story 31. Whilst running a Christmas function for a mixed group of people, I worked the bar. One of the groups happened to work at the same place as my mom, and my mom was their superior. These women were being pretty flirty and cheeky, as is the norm after a few drinks, but when asked if I wanted to finish early and go for a bit of fun, I had a girlfriend and was 15 years her junior, so I just mentioned that it wouldn't sound good if it got back to my mom the next day. She almost had a heart when I name-dropped. Bless. All that expensive alcohol for a moment later to become instantly sober. Bless. Story 32. Not a bartender, but a Lyft driver, so I get my fair share of wasted people. My favorite story is about a really drunk guy that I picked up from a strip club. Well-dressed, decent-looking guy, but so drunk that he can't even walk on his own. He and an escort that he picked up get in the car, and he's in the middle of telling her all about his business. He and his roommate are totally going to be millionaires by the end of the year. He doesn't want to say anything about it, though, because his rivals are probably recording what he says through his phone. How does he know? Because they'd be stupid not to, of course. Anytime the escort says something, she's trying to change the subject because nobody cares about his business. She tries asking him questions, most of which he uses to try to talk about his business and how rich, smart he is. So what do you and your friend, his roommate, do for, I don't really have friends, I have colleagues. Okay, what do you and your colleagues do for fun? Like when you're not doing stuff for your business. They like to go goof off and get drunk every night. I'm too busy focusing on my new startup for any of that. You don't understand how much money and thought I've invested in this if you think I can just go have fun. What kind of stuff are you interested in? What did you study in college? I'm guessing you mean, what was my major? I studied everything. You'd have to if your classes were so basic to you that they bored you. But to answer what you meant to ask, I was a computer science major. It was a waste of time. I never even finished before I got my first job as a consultant for Red Hat. I left that job a year ago to start working on my new business. I have plenty of money to live off of without working while I focus on that. This goes on for about half an hour before we get to his apartment. He gets out and starts walking away, forgetting about the girl he left in my car. She looked pretty relieved to me, and she asks if I can just take her home and gives me $20 for the ride since I already ended the genius rich businessman's ride on the app. Ride to her place was pretty quiet, which is normal, so I just turned Spotify on to listen to music. Only thing she said to me was that he was really different back at the club. Story 33. I work in a wealthier part of town at a comedy club which draws in an older, wealthier crowd. A smattering of wealthy women who made out well in the divorce and beyond. Lots of first dates. It's never a dull evening. I tend to work in the forward-facing bars in either the lounge or the sit-down restaurant. I'm a slightly above-average-looking guy. I'm chubby and could definitely drop a few pounds, but I'm always well-dressed and have a sense of humor, so I feel it balances. That said, I'm very much happily married and wear my very shiny tungsten ring every night I work. The number of times I've been propositioned for 3 ways, sex, or just unabashedly hit on is insane. The most in your face? I still have no idea what happened. Woman comes up to the bar, seems loose already, maybe had 1 or 2, tells me she's on a first date and is early, so make her a dirty martini. I ask her how dirty. Lindsay Lohan dirty? She without a beat reply, however dirty you think you should make it for a girl like me. Crap, all right, she likes it. The dude comes, I give him a bourbon rocks pour. He tips me 100% very obviously on their $20 tab, and they're seated at their table. And so begins some weird game of one-upmanship. They are very handsy, and at one point we had to check the men's room because we thought she followed her date in. Anyhow, I'm done and I pack my bag and start to leave. I have another bartender behind the bar, only because he is working an event. She clocks me leaving, gets up, and in not an inside voice begins this exchange. If you leave, who is going to make this dirty girl her martini? I reply. She's in the very capable hands of my friend, and it was a pleasure to meet her. She clocks my blue backpack and says, "That blue backpack is really sexy like you. I'd duck you with it or without it. Have a good night." Walks over to the dude who had to have heard this, kisses him hard on the mouth, pulls up for a second and waves goodbye. Story 34. Not specifically something a customer told me, but related to bartending. We hired a new girl, seemed pretty normal at the interview. Shows up for her first shift and about an hour into it, sent her to the keg, storage room, to get a list of beer for the coolers. She comes out acting weird and kind of manic, so that sets off some red flags. She homes in on a regular husband-wife couple and just won't leave them alone. To the point they come up and ask is to get her away from them. So that works for a bit, until she starts in again, and we, my wife at the time, have to tell her if she doesn't stop, she will just have to go and lose the job. Absolutely flips crap and goes crazy. Screaming and trying to fight everyone in the place. Wife and another bartender end up in a fist fight with her. Tables getting knocked over and glasses thrown, etc. Before the rest of us literally have to pin this girl to the floor. Cops show up and the fight is on again. She manages to bite one officer's thumb badly, and that earns her a tasing. Ends up being carried out face down, cuffed by 4 officers. Search of the keg room finds a met rig. Multiple assault charges and possession. Story 35? Oh boy, I haven't worked as a bartender in years. When I was an exchange student in Japan, I worked in a bar part-time. Part of my job was to talk with clients, and usually Japanese people don't really like to hold conversations because they believe they have poor English, but do become looser and more talkative once alcohol kicks in. One man came in, and after a couple of drinks, which is like half a bottle for anyone, not Asian, he starts prodding me with questions and accusing me of yellow fever after I said I could have a Japanese girlfriend. Relationships are hardcore there. Story 36. There's a regular at my job, Jerry, who is also our locksmith. He's a mess. He likes the daytime bartender best, but he's known to come in around noon and not leave until midnight or later. He's also prone to lying and forgetting what lies he's told us. We all swap Jerry stories about the ridiculous things he insists are true. Some of my favorites are, he's got 8 kids, he's a gay man, he impulsively bought 4 horses, he sold all 4 horses less than a week later, he saw the play Hamilton in high school, he's installed locks on the White House. Story 37. 12 years of bar useful. Bartender, bar manager under my belt. Boy, howdy have I heard and seen some stuff. There was the guy who was trying to pick up a very, very disinterested regular with stories of his time as a helicopter pilot in Iraq. He had apparently just got back to town yesterday after his second 4-year deployment. I made a point of mentioning that I'd served him 2 days before and asked him how his job hunt was going right in front of her. He was an idiot, and I regret nothing. Another time, dude A demanded to know when dude B usually comes in because he owed him a bunch of drug money and was going to beat the crap out of him. Of course, I'm not going to tell you that. No one wants that crap in their bar. Oh, and it may make me an accomplice, so double duck off. The Iranian security guard I worked with overheard 2 other Iranian patrons discussing their current substances dealing operations in Farsi. This was in a red light district, so we heard a lot of that sort of thing, but they were throwing around large enough numbers that he felt compelled to inform the police. Not sure if anything came of it. There's more, probably better stories that aren't strictly overhead stuff if anyone is interested. Story 38. Bartending 20 years or so ago. Had a regular in there every day around 4 p.m. He was nice, older black gentleman, chatty and friendly with everyone. One day, he was the only one there, and he proceeded to tell me all about how he used to be addicted, how he stole from everyone, mugged people, basically destroyed his life and that of everyone around him. Then he tells me about his wife who stuck by him through all of it, all the crap he did. All the things he put her through, multiple rehabs and jail time, and she believed in him. stuck by him and supported him, and that they had now been married for 25 years, with him being off substances for the last 10, 15 years. He told me all about her with tears in his eyes because he knew she loved him more than anything and was an amazing woman. I agreed that she sounded like an amazing woman. About 30 minutes later, he begins to tell me all about how he's having sex with his secretary and that he pays for her to have an apartment, and sometimes it's tricky to spend time with both women. Those two stories back to back had me raging against him so bad. He figured out he had crossed a line with me, and we never had long conversations again. I served him his drinks and avoided all conversations with him from then on. Story 39. Not a bartender, but was party to a crazy exchange once. Myself and a friend of mine who suffers from giantism and is massive dude, we were at a Mexican restaurant once at the bar. This entitled Redneck Dude Bro was at the bar drunk as crap. He tells the bartender, "Hey, get me a mini bottle to go." Bottle 2. The bartender tells him, "I can't do that. And you've had too much anyway." The dude yells, "Look here." And he pauses and stares at his name tag. "Look here! Get me a damn drink or I'm going to beat your..." The bartender immediately walks away, probably to call the police. And then the dude looks at my buddy. "Hey, big man." "Damn," my friend says under his breath. "What?" he mutters, not amused. "I'll give you $100 bucks to beat that Mexican," the dude bellows. Everyone in the restaurant is now staring. My buddy played it cool. "Man, you seem like you're a total badass. You can't handle your own business." "Damn right," he yells. So I look at the guy and say, "Hey man, listen here. I'm in law enforcement and I think you should leave." Dude says, "You think so?" "Yep, damn that. I'm out." And he runs out of the restaurant. The bartender came back and thanked us. My buddy looks at me and says, "Thanks for saving me $1,000. How did I do that?" I asked. If he had taken one step towards me, his ass was getting tossed over that bar into all those expensive plates and glasses. Story 40. I work at a small corner bar in a small town. It's proudly and purposefully a dive. I used to work a lot of weeknights closing shifts when most patrons would be regulars. There was one woman who would come in and drink wine. We had two kinds, red and white, and it was cheap. And more often than not would start crying about something once she was good and drunk. She was nice enough though, and was usually with other people. So we never really had to deal with her drama directly. One night, she comes in around 9 or so, and happens to be my only customer at the moment. I knew her well enough to chat about random stuff and had nothing better to do. So 2, 3, 4 glasses of wine go down, and she starts talking about how she believes in ghosts, angels, etc. Then she wants to tell me something she's never told anyone before. She's very serious, and I can tell she believes everything she's saying, and she proceeds to tell me about the time she woke up in the middle of a night and saw a leprechaun in her room. We're in Midwest America, not Ireland. She described in detail how he looked, stereotypical, smelled like freshly mowed grass and tobacco, and acted. He didn't speak, just winked at her and left, apparently. She knows she wasn't dreaming and knows he was really there, and that's why she believes in other supernatural phenomena. Fortunately, that was about the time the second shift clientele started coming in and I could take my leave. We all used to say she was a little crazy, but damn. Story 41. Back in the 90s, I bartended in a club called the Zone Cafe in Hong Kong. Massive triad hangout, tons of fights. Closing time was about 4 a.m. Anyway, this bloke wouldn't leave. In the end, he was hauled out by the bouncers. All the staff sit down and have a couple of beers, then we lock up and walk towards the metro, underground station. All along the pavement, there's splashes of red liquid for a good 30 yards. Found the guy's body between 2 parked cars. He passed away. Rumor has it he had sex with the girlfriend of a big brother in the triad. Poor man. Story 42. Had a Native American guy come in and wanted to buy a bunch of beer for him and his buddies. We flat out refused him because he was completely plastered. We basically told him we stopped selling alcohol for the night, movie theater bar. So he walked off all pissed off, saying he would go to another bar and get drunk. A girl behind him comes up to the bar and asks for wine, and we kind of tell her the same thing, but also subtly let her know it's because of the guy. She understands and is about to leave and come back in a minute or so when the guy comes over and starts yelling at us, calling us a holes who won't sell alcohol to him because he's a native, as he continued to call us vulgar things. We got security to come in and kicked him out. Related, but she didn't talk to us. This girl comes out of a theater and goes into the restroom and vomits in one of the stalls. But she missed the toilet completely, ended up puking all over the stall except on the toilet. Kind of impressive, actually. And she goes back into her theater to watch the rest of her movie. By this time, none of us know what happened. 10 minutes later, I crap you not! She comes out again. Same bathroom, different stall. Does the exact same thing to the stall with her puke. One of the girls I worked with had to clean it up, and I've never felt so sorry for someone, but also had a sigh of relief that it wasn't a guy who did it in the men's bathroom. Story 43. I had a very old guy who was a daily regular at my old bar tell me he was going to take his life away. I was the only person at the bar. He spoke too much. He was very quiet and a little weird, but he was always friendly to me, so I was friendly back. He told me he had no kids or family, and he just couldn't be bothered anymore. After that, I always made time to talk to him and see how he's doing. I told my boss at the time, and he got other staff to keep checking on him even after I left. Thankfully, I hear he's still a regular now and comes in most days months later. Story 44. So I've worked and grown up in a pub my whole life, family business with a flat above. For the last 10 years, I've had this customer come in called Bill. He seemed nice and quiet, genuine, had what I considered a good taste in music, a quick wit and good conversation. I found out he was a private tutor and actually quite intelligent. He would make the passing comment on a woman from time to time, much like many other customers do, so you don't think much of it. Truthfully, these girls were perhaps a bit young for him. One quiet night, it was just me and Bill in, and we were talking, and we got onto hobbies, and he proceeded to tell me that he collected mannequin parts, and not only that he liked to dress them up. He then went on to show me numerous pictures of these mannequins wearing different forms of lingerie and women's clothes. This was the first clear sign that Bill was a bit of an odd one. Later down the line, I read an article in our local paper stating that a private tutor had his license revoked and was banned from all the local colleges and universities. This man was Bill. He had been trying to groom his students. He never took on male students. Bill still comes in from time to time, but I just can't have the same interactions with him before. As you can imagine, it's awkward AF. Story 45. I once sat with this old man who was dining by himself. Old people alone are my weakness, and I just have to keep them company if I have the time. He asked me if I was religious, and just to placate him, I said yes. Big mistake. Said he could tell and that the Lord had brought him into my restaurant because he wanted us to meet. Old man continued to tell me how he lived about 4 hours up the river in the middle of the forest with just his 2 dogs, not even a phone line. He proceeds to ask me if I will come back with him to see his house and talk more about the Lord. I apologized and said I was busy because no, you can't take me where no one will hear my screams. About 2 hours after he leaves, old man returns to my work and hands me a book about a Native American shaman. Asks if he can take me to his favorite restaurant, which happens to also be a few hours' drive away. I politely decline and he eventually leaves. He came back a few weeks later, but luckily, I was off. The book is on my shelf, but I've never read it. I still don't know if he was just a lonely old man or the crazy guy your mom warns you about. Story 46. There's seriously so many. I stopped bartending a couple years ago, and the random craziness is one of the only things I honestly miss, besides the money. 1. The time a guy and girl were so drunk, they were off in a corner having sex thinking no one noticed. I grabbed a mic and said, "If you can't wait to duck till you get home, go do it in your car." Everyone knew what I was talking about, and they stopped. 2. The time a girl was wasted and it was closing time. I called her a cab and was counting down the drawer in the office while I waited. I looked up at the screen playing the cameras that are overlooking the bar to make sure she was still there, and she took her top off, laid on the bar, and started playing with herself. And it was all on camera. The kitchen guys liked that show. 3. There was one time I was serving and closed off my entire section because a couple came in, gave me their card, and started racking up a bill, running me like crazy, ordering drinks and shots for the entire restaurant, just madness. They left me a $600 tip. It was one of the best nights there. I cried. I was so thankful. There's a lot more, but those are what I could think of off the top of my head. Story 47. Hey, Hiccup, you didn't see me take this bottle of wine that was sitting on the bar and put it in my purse, said, while very obviously taking the bottle of wine that was sitting on the bar and putting it in her purse. Story 48. One of the best customers I had was this middle-aged Aussie who had moved to Canada with his wife. She was a doctor and he was an air traffic controller. By the time I met him, they had decided to move back to Australia, and he had to stay in Canada to sell the house and get everything organized, and she had already headed back because of a job offer. He was said that he hated being in the house alone all the time, so he'd come in early, 5 or 6-ish, and just hang out and tell me stories. He had been in the army and always wanted me to play the cha-cha slide for him. Apparently, it was something he and his buddies would listen to and unwind. They also had a dance they'd do to it, but sadly, he refused to show it to me. Each time he came in, he was always super polite, really funny, and would help me if I ever had any issues. He would sometimes go and get sushi from across the road and share with me. I didn't know sushi pizza was a thing until he insisted I try it. I was sad when I stopped seeing him come in because I knew I'd never see him again, but happy that he was finally home and with his wife again. Story 49. Might not be as interesting as cheating customers, but the crap Bill came out with made me laugh. For some reason at the bar I worked at, we hired this piano guy to entertain the guests. He was constantly crap-faced and thought he was a great player. I gave him free drinks sometimes just to see how bizarre his behavior would get. People were either cheering sarcastically or too drunk to notice how poor his piano skills were. After one of his failures of a performance, he stumbled over to the bar and said, "John, I reckon I could be famous, like a movie star. Look at me, I'm too good for this damn place. This guy is nuts, so I'm just like, right." But he seems to take everything as a compliment and thought I was encouraging him. The only reason the boss keeps him around is because of how little we pay him and how the guests think he's funny, but in a pathetic way. One day out of nowhere, he just started bragging to me about how the boss says he, Bill, is the reason most of our customers came in. The sad part is he probably even believes all these lies he tells. Damn Bill. Story 50. I was behind the bar on Nye, but luckily only till 11 p.m., so just in time for the champagne and fireworks. Well, it was quietly starting to reach the end of my shift when this guy in his late 20s sat down at the bar and said in English, I'm not from an English-speaking country, he was an American. Give me some random beer, please. Not an unusual request, as we had a pretty impressive list of beers, which could have been difficult to choose from. Gave him some regular lager and started to tidy up the bar. I noticed that he seemed kind of sad, so I asked if everything is okay. Turns out that he was visiting my country with his friends, but they got too drunk in the hotel pre-rinsing and he was left all alone. I felt so bad for the guy that after finishing my shift, I went to him and invited him to join me at the town square fireworks. He happily obliged, and off we went. I met up with some friends and introduced them to this American guy, and we had a nice time popping champagnes and watching the fireworks. In the crowds of people, we parted ways accidentally, but I saw him later at the bar I worked at, and he seemed to be having a pretty good time, surrounded by some gals. Story 51. So we had this regular, Richard, who had some issues. He was rather attractive and could be a sweetheart, but was really messed up once you got to know him. One of his notable features was a complete reflection on his face regarding how many drinks he had had. I could always tell when he was before his first drink, a few drinks on or drunk, just by looking at his mouth curl. Anyway, he had issues, and after about the third drink would start revealing them. The alright sober bloke turned to this guy, who obviously had some concerning psychological issues, and told me everything about how and why he picks up girls just to refuse them, how he doesn't feel any attachment to anyone, his control issues, his depression, you name it. Eventually, I started repeating him the stuff he told me while drunk when he was sober. He would look at me in admiration, thinking I'm psychic and get him so well. Apparently, it was really Thudic, and he got a lot better after a few months of this, but got worse again after I left the bar. He does heavy stuff now, and I don't talk to him if I can see it on his face. Unfortunately, this has been the case for the past 3 years. Story 52. Not a bartender, but a waiter. I worked at this awesome dive in college that sadly is no longer there. We had a male customer trying to hit on a regular. The customer obviously wanted into her pants and the regular wasn't having any of it, so she excused herself and went to the bathroom. While she was gone, I walked up to the customer and asked him how things were going. He starts bragging about how he was going to having sex tonight. I look at him and said, "You may have to wait a couple of weeks first. She hasn't had her sex reassignment surgery yet, unless you don't mind having sex with a girl who has a penis." It took him a couple of minutes to process what I said, but when he did, his eyes bugged out like a cartoon wolf and he asked for his check. Well, while I'm taking care of his check, the girl comes back out, and this guy just sits there staring at her like she was freaking Pyramid Head until he got his card back and left. I explained what happened to the bartender and the regular, then spent the rest of that shift giggling to myself. Story 53. 20 years ago, I was a bartender in a large pub in Germany. We used to have a lot of expats as regulars, and we attracted a lot of people from other countries, even if they just stayed in our town for a few nights. I remember one guy coming in and getting wasted. He was from Czech Republic and was looking for his girlfriend, who was an au pair in our town and used to frequent our pub quite often. He was very sad, as it turned out. She was betraying him with several other guys. He told me more and more about her and finally showed me a picture. Well, I found out that I was one of these guys, but I did not know that she was in a relationship. I served him several free drinks and tried to cheer him up, but did not tell him that I knew her better than I should have. In the end, he gave me a hug and thanked me for listening to him. I felt dirty and guilty when I closed the pub and went home. Story 54. Former bartender. So many stories coming to mind. First off, the number of hammered people talking about entering divorce, dealing with divorce, or just finishing divorce is completely mind-boggling. Always hated those drunks. Had a regular, he was a private former Marine, just got back from somewhere in Africa. We weren't best friends, but we talked whenever he was in, talked about state of the nation, what's happening elsewhere in the world. Normally, I would bring a bottle of Blanton's with me to his part of the bar and pour him a few while chatted. Something seemed different about him this time, and next thing I know, he's grabbing the bottle himself and diving into the damn bottle. Having a bunch of military friends, I assumed his trip to Africa didn't go well. Next thing I know, this hardcore dude is on the edge of bawling and telling me some messed up crap. I sobered up pretty quick and just listened to him because I think he needed it. After a while, he called a buddy who came and picked him up. I just kind of sat there in shock and thought about what he had retold. Story 55. We had this regular called Angela. Lovely old lady, a little on the large side and pulled her dentures out to downshots. But overall, couldn't ask for a nicer patron. Anyway, one night, Angela got a little bit too wasted without any of us noticing, and she's sitting next to me while I make special shots for this hen party. They're being a little flirtatious, but it's all in good fun. Angela, having watched the entire interaction up to this point, downs her shot and says to the women, "Ladies, this is how you get a man." She turns to me and pulls out her dentures, downs her shot, slots them back in and says, "What has a vice-like grip and had sex like a tiger?" I'm a bit taken aback, so I just kind of laugh out, I don't know. What? I feel nails embed themselves into my right cheek as Angela grabs it through the open bar door, followed closely by her winking at me and saying, "Grrr." Story 56. When I was in college working as a bartender, some frat guys would come in often and sit at the bar. I was friendly enough with them from parties and had one of them in two of my classes through the years. They all come in one night. I can tell they're wasted. I served them a few beers and most of them left. Two of them are sitting at the bar. Still, his buddy goes to the bathroom. Kid at the bar tells me he has something. Go tell me I figure he's drunk and it's nothing. Guy tells me how a few months before he abused the girl I was going out with at the time. I thought it was some ducked-up joke till I looked at him and saw him crying at the bar. I kept my composure that night, told his friend to take him home. Ended up beating the crap out of him a few weeks later at a party. Story 57. I'm not a bartender, but I drive Uber so plenty of drunk rambling to hear. I pick up a lively bunch of college students who had a hefty pregame. A few minutes and the guy sitting shotgun is venting about how people judge him for trying to make light of a rough family situation. I don't really dig, but rather say that's not fair. People need to laugh about rough stuff sometimes. 100% of comedians probably agree. He explains both of his brothers have mental illness, one autistic, the other I don't remember, and I just quietly ask, "So what do you have?" Everybody in the car loses their crap. For a moment, I thought I was going to get my ass kicked, trying to lighten the mood. After it settled, they were all still laughing for a bit after, and I felt safe again. We get to the bar, and the guy actually thanked me for making the joke, explaining that he's tired of the constant pity party he gets when he tells people that. I don't know what to say, so I just smile. Story 58. Old ladies are horny. I do catering. The old ladies go on about me, or athletes, or random men they've met. One of the more badass ladies said something like, "Sorry, am I being inappropriate? If anyone ever complains, I just tell them I don't remember it because of my age." Story 59. My friend runs a pub that specializes in craft beers on tap from all over the world. At 1.5 years ago, he needed help because many of his seasoned bartenders graduated from their studies within the same months, and he had a huge gap on the roster. What should only have been a few weekends turned out to be 2 years every weekend plus my normal job. The funniest conversation were between three women. All looked like they were wearing home-knitted clothes. One girl says to another, "I love my husband so much, even more when we were married in our prior life. Some people are just on another astral plan." Story 60. I'm late to the party here, and I'm not a bartender, but this story has always stuck with me. I'm staying at a Best Western in Pahrump, Nevada. I was using it as a base for visiting Death Valley. After my day of visiting, I decide to have a drink at the hotel's bar. As I'm sitting, a rather drunk fellow comes in with a couple friends. Now this guy was a depressed drunk, for lack of a better word. He starts loudly slurring this story about his ex-wife, telling everyone within earshot how she had been an escort before he met her, but she had been upfront about it, and he's like, "Whatever, it's in the past." And then he adds that there was only one thing that bugged him about her past. She had a customer who liked to watch her have sex. Story 61. It wasn't something someone told me so much as showed me. I worked at a brewery, and an out-of-towner was treating this place like a mecca. He bragged about having had our beer since we opened our doors and even had a collection on his mantelpiece of every kind of beer we had ever released. He whips out his phone to show me, bringing up an image of the bottles and growlers. Then he swipes left instead of right. Had he swiped right, he would have shown me more beer trophies. By swiping left, he showed me the image of himself, completely naked with the biggest crap-eating grin on his face. He mumbles what? Like he's never seen it before and makes eye contact with me. I know what I saw. He knows that I know. I know that he knows that I know. He slips his phone back into his pocket, takes his beer, and walks away from the bar, never to speak to me again. Story 62. I got told by a 70-year-old woman while she was throwing punches at me to go and work in a dolly mixture factory, whatever that means. I just cracked up laughing. Story 63. There was someone who kept going on about how he didn't like the fact that foreigners were coming to our country, Belgium. I thought it was a stupid opinion, but he was paying well, so I didn't really say anything about it. Then he started talking about his wife, who he apparently got by traveling to the Philippines. Until today, that is still the best bit of hypocrisy I've ever heard. Story 64. My dad owned a tavern and would purposely give the pain-in-the-ass customers back too much change just to see if they would tell him. Told him what kind of people they were. And no, not the obviously drunk customers. Story 65. I had a regular a few years ago that would come in every Friday around 9 p.m. and have a few beers. He had this pain in his eyes and looked sad whenever he came in. One time he came in on a Friday before Christmas, absolutely devastated. Asked me for the usual without a word. Then he drank for a few hours, even faster than usual. It was slow, so I walked up to him and asked if he was okay. And he poured his soul out. Apparently, he's been in a custody battle with his ex and hasn't seen his kids for half a year. He told me that he just found out that his ex moved with the kids far out into the country, and he found out by the Christmas gifts that he sent came back to him. Poor guy, I still feel his pain. Story 66. If we had sex and I got pregnant, that baby would get sent to a monetary okay? I working bar back, and the lady who said that to me was pushing 60 and slurring heavily. She also had one of those big, flowery dress hats like the Queen wears. Story 67. Damn, it's so sad no one is going to see this because it's buried, but I'll tell it anyway. I was bartending one time, and it was super crowded in the bar, and I was in the zone, making drinks, tuning out the music to listen to what the customers needed. I'm making a row of bombs for a customer when I hear a guy tell two girls in the crowd, "When I was in middle school, I taped my ears to my head and wore a beanie for a year because I thought my ears were too big." I have no clue why he said it. The thing is, the girls weren't even listening, so he kind of just blurted it out to the air, and I swear, I was the only one who heard it. It still makes me laugh every time I think about it. Story 68. This guy was hitting the Bundy, Australian dark rum, pretty hard. He had been chatting up a woman, but she had left earlier. He was boasting about how he was going around to her place at 1:30 a.m. to get some good loving. He got a text message shortly later. He was going around there at 2:30 instead, since her boyfriend would leave for work at 2. Story 69. I used to work at a Chili's in the early 2000 AES. I had a really sad-looking man at the bar who kept ordering President Margaritas. This is before Chili's started cutting people back, so I served him about 5 of these. He was a good-looking dude, muscular, but he had the saddest eyes I have ever seen. Towards the end of his binge, he just starts crying. I felt really uncomfortable, but asked him if he was all right. He confessed that he was in love with his sister, who was getting married in 2 days. All I could do was offer him some more water. And yes, this happened in Arkansas. Story 70. As the GM of a popular bar club, my favorite game to play begins when someone demands to speak to my manager. An unruly patron being cut off is the most common reason this request is made. I politely ask them to wait for a moment, slip into the back, change into professional attire. When I bartend, I wear our company-wide uniform, reappear, and address the person again. "Hello, I'm the manager. How can I help you?" When they don't realize they are dealing with the same person as before, this is the best proof you can obtain that it's time for them to call it a night. Story 71. I told this drunk old hag my name. It's kind of an uncommon name. She laughed, pointed at me, and said, "Everything about you is a mistake." She's a real pro. Story 72. Woman once offhandedly mentioned to me that her neighbor ran over her, the woman's brother, and he passed away and then fled town because the other brothers planned to beat her in retaliation if they ever saw her again. No idea if she was just screwing with me or not. The deceased was supposedly married to the runner-over, who pinned him against the wall of his house with a truck and told the neighbors she'd already called the ambulance and they didn't need to do anything. Then, as the story goes, she just left. Story 73. Maybe it's just me, but it seems to me bartenders can always spot escorts before other people can. They're so specific as far as being served, seriously, at least in our city, that it's pretty funny. Also, the sheer amount of times grown-ass adults injure themselves while drunk and continue partying is astonishing. A lot of crying, barfing, peeing in inappropriate places. Depending on where I've worked, I've seen it all, especially holidays or parades. 40-year-old men puking up their breakfasts. Really thought older crowds would handle it better, but seems no age or gender is above drinking too much too fast and acting a fool. Story 74. This one guy told me the story of how his alcohol habits ruined all 3 of his marriages and told me my girlfriend, who works at the same pub, and I will never survive unless we both give up drinking alcohol. Also, I was dating this guy once, and he came into my old bar job with his colleagues. Hammered. He was really cute and sweet, and I was happy to see him until he pointed at me and shouted across the bar to everyone, "He gave me a BJ yesterday." Safe to say I crumbled up, thanks for telling everyone that. Story 75. Had a 50-plus semi-attractive woman order top-shelf margaritas for a couple hours. An hour and a half in, she spills her guts on why she's so down. Her husband of almost 30 years, her high school sweetheart, cheated on her with her friend and gave her herpes. She's been coming in semi-regularly for more than a few months now, and the last few times she's paid for her last drink with change from her purse. Story 76. Same guy. You eat a lot of sweets. That must mean you're sweet. You're my kind of girl. Doing chores and being so smart. I'm going to make you my Hispanic maid. Story 77. Not a bartender, but one of the cringiest things I've ever said in my life was said to a bartender. After 2 of my friends were kicked out for being drunks, I mumbled goodbye to the bar and finished with, "Well, I still think you're hot, even though none of my friends agree. One of the many things that keep me up at night." Now, I don't remember saying this, but another friend who was working there that night told me a few days later, after hearing it straight from the bartender herself. So, yeah, regrets. Story 78. Back when I used to 10 bar, I had a strange-looking fellow come in, and after 2 beers, he began monologue about how Bush 2 was one of the lizard people, And the Clintons were also lizard people. I was okay to just, yeah, and non, but he just kept getting more and more into it, louder and louder about it. I ended up cutting him off after 2 Coronas, and he got all pissed off about how we are sheep and needed to wake up. Story 79. I had a drunk man tell me all the disgusting things he wanted to do to me. Being a small female, I was terrified, but my manager wouldn't let me deny him service. I quit and left him to deal with this man. Story 80. After a while, the regulars become like friends and family. Some you don't like, but they become like the family member you don't particularly care for, but you love them just the same. The only problem is that now a bunch of your friends and family are chronic drunks with all the problems that entails. They share it with you, and it becomes a heavy burden. When their life falls apart, as it inevitably will, you can't help but feel it personally. Story 81. I can't think of a single incident of people saying something, but I have seen people becoming openly crazy while drunk, saying things they would totally never say while sober. We had one girl that we asked to leave because she wouldn't stop yelling slurs about us. Story 82. The manager from next door came in and was drinking after her shift. Got hammered and started hitting on me fairly aggressively and then said she would see me at my house on her way out the door. That my girlfriend who works with me was not a happy camper, and I was terrified she actually was going to show up. My roommate works at her restraint. Story 83. I've had a few brags about them being dealers. Someone recently, only guy in the bar was with his mate, wanted to make it known to me how he's shifting a couple van loads of substances this weekend. Needless to say, I wasn't offered any free samples, but I'm pretty sure the old rule of don't get high off your own supply went out the window. Story 84. One afternoon, a regular rushed in saying the police were after him. He put a cake box on the bar, and there was a gun in it. He asked me to hide it for him. I was super scared, but said no. He grabbed the cake box and took off. I never saw him again. Story 85. A cop showed me video of him and his partner beating the crap out of a guy in a parking garage. They both lost their jobs shortly afterwards, as it was a full-blown scandal at this point. Idiots. Story 86. One old guy told me he had friends ready to hack the IRS. My best friend was visiting, so I arranged for the drunk to meet my hacker friend who could get him in without being seen. They chatted for well over an hour while I was working. I've never been prouder of my shy wee pal.